Welcome to Season 6, Episode 10 of Fire Away, Rudner Law's online show focused on the employment law issues that matter to you. My name is Brittany Taylor. I am an employment lawyer, partner at Rudner Law, and your host of this episode of Fire Away. Fire Away streams live online every month, and if you missed an episode or want to watch one again, they are always available on our YouTube channel, Facebook page, and on our website. John Rodriguez was my guest last month, and there were so many amazing topics we really didn't get a chance to get into. So we are very happy to have him back for another discussion today. Just as a refresher, John is the founder of Empathic Security Cultures LLC, based in Austin, Texas. John brings over 40 years of corporate security experience into today's discussion. He has a passion for security culture development, mentoring, mental health, workplace psychological safety, and mitigating hostile environmental risks. So let's jump right in. John, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for coming back.
Great. Hi, Brittany. Thanks for having me back.
Excellent. All right. So last time we touched very, very briefly on the idea of investigative interview skills, and in particular, compassionate investigative interview skills. I want to really dive into this topic today. And in particular, what I'd like to hear about from you to start us off is what does this mean? What makes an interview compassionate versus the more standard style interview that we would expect to see?
Certainly. So my philosophy is when you're conducting any kind of investigation, especially if you're coming from outside that location, you might be corporate HR, corporate legal, external legal partner, or anyone, that you really have to look at, or if you're doing it there at the site, look at any investigation, not so much transactional, but in two parts: resolving, finding the complete truth, finding out what happened, and taking appropriate measures, whatever those are, to fix it and to hold people accountable, but also to protect the culture. Because after the investigation is gone, people are impacted, and they could be positively impacted, or their perception of how people were treated by leadership or whoever was leading the investigation could have a long lasting impact of how they see leadership and how they trust them and how they feel about working there. So, an investigation, and there are all kinds, there's some that are complex, some that are with no witnesses, the he said, she said ones, some that are relatively simple, that the evidence is there, either a paper trail or corroborating witnesses and so forth. What I like to share or stress with folks that I work with is you have to think of it as helping people get through a process that they really don't feel comfortable being involved in. And it's human nature. I mentioned it briefly on our other chat at the end about when you bring somebody in for an interview or an investigation, you could be a threat to that person, even if they didn't do anything wrong. Just the uncertainty of what's this person going to ask me? Am I in trouble? Are my peers going to think of me differently? Is my street cred or my reputation at work? Is my ability to uh, know that I have my job, that there's certainty? So just going into that interview at the beginning, I really stress to look at the human aspect of having sympathy and empathy and compassion to get through the process, not transactional, but helping everybody you come in contact with through the process.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think you've touched on some really important items there, which is, when we talk about what is the value of this, right? Because obviously understanding what do we mean when we're talking about a compassionate investigative interview skill set, that's really important to just understand what we're talking about, but also why do we care, right? Why should employers be invested in training their staff to make sure that they have this skill set if their staff are going to be conducting investigations? And I think you touched on a couple points there, which is one, as you pointed out, the relationship doesn't necessarily end after the investigation is over, right? You might need to maintain those relationships. Those might be relationships that are really valuable that you actually want to foster and you don't want to damage in the course of the investigation. But two, also that you genuinely do want to find out what happened,
Of
right? And
course.
in order to do that, I think that there is a value in making people feel comfortable enough that they can share with you, right? They're not immediately going on the defensive because, as you said, it's a really stressful situation, right? Being called in to participate in an investigation, even if you're not the respondent, right? Even if you're just a witness, that's a really stressful situation to be in. So what are some of the skills, like what are some of the soft skills that you teach investigators or interviewers in a situation like this to help them approach their investigation in a more compassionate, human level?
Right. So I start with putting ourselves, understanding how it feels to go through that process and really focusing on obstacles as us as human beings, our biases. We may have expediency bias. We want to get through something fast. We think that we're experienced investigators, and we are, the ones that have time or years of investigations completed. But you have to be aware of your own fallibility, your own makeup with every case. I mean, and you have to, one of the things I stress is after every interview you do or every investigation you do, you should self-critique yourself and get feedback from others that were your partner in that because it's an art. There's investigations are part science, paper trail, the investigative theory, the structure, who you need to interview, and so forth. But the other part, the art of human connection, really happens when you're dealing with everybody the minute you set foot in that office or that facility.
Right. Right. Okay. No, absolutely makes sense. And I know that you actually offer a course that specifically addresses and tries to help people develop their compassionate investigative interview skills. And I believe the next session of this course is in February 2024. So who, in your view, can benefit from a course like this? Who is the audience that should be taking this type of course?
I structure it for any leader that does any kind of investigation, and it can be an accident that EH&S looks into compliance, legal, security, even procurement when they're dealing with the vendor and there's a little bit of negotiation, say they're going to buy $1 million of computers or software, until that vendor says that's my final price, there's always room to get a little bit of a better piece. So it's for everybody that does any kind of investigation, especially the ones that are pure investigators, or that's one of their core services. Again, it's an art and you can always get better. There's a lot of good courses out there, but I try in my course to bring a different perspective on, how do I get better? What are my roadblocks, my biases, the obstacles that can affect me, regardless of how many years of experience I have? How do I get better and help that person get through that process in a way that they feel that I treated them fair? Because fairness is one of the main social domains that we all have, that I protect their status within the organization, the relationships that they might have. You have to be aware of all those things. Of course, if somebody did something wrong, if they stole something, that they threatened somebody, they sexually harassed somebody, you're going to treat them the same. But of course, at the end of your investigation, and depending on the findings, the leadership, the company, legal, HR will determine what is going to happen with that person, right? And every case is a little bit different. So
Right.
you have to treat everybody the same way throughout the process.
Right, right. So if we need to get tough, we can do that after the investigation once we've identified, okay, what exactly went on here and how do we respond to that? But I really like that message of during the investigation, it should be the same. Which I think gets back to a really, really important point whenever we're talking about investigations is to never predetermine the outcome, right? You don't want to go into an investigation with a preconceived idea about what happened, right? Like you said, so in some cases, we do have a lot of evidence before we go into the investigation, right? We might have recordings, we might have footage, we might have emails, we might have all of that stuff, but we still want to go into the investigation not assuming that we know everything, right? Because otherwise, why would we be doing the investigation, right? We do still want to give people a chance to tell their side of the story. So I want to talk a little bit more about the course. I'm wondering if this would be of interest to, because you had mentioned kind of it doesn't matter your skill level, it doesn't matter how experienced you are, you can always learn and grow. So I'm thinking of somebody like an HR person who maybe only does investigations every once in a while. Would this be something that would be valuable for them to learn kind of these skills?
Yeah, absolutely. It's another skill in their toolbox, their ability. And one of the things I stress is you have to practice. You can go through any course out there, but one of the things that I stress and when I developed my course is two things, impact and retention. Throughout the course, I want the information to be make sense and have an impact where they have insights and they realize, oh, this is something new, a different perspective, and retention. And retention means practice. And with the internet, with interviews of all kinds of folks on TV, I tell them my best friend is my TV remote because there's always opportunities to find, you're not in your investigator mindset and level of focus when you're on your sofa watching something, but you should be aware of opportunities. If there's an interview with somebody, rewind it and play it back. And one of the things in my courses, we focus on the quality of questions. Is your question a high quality question, not a leading question? For example, the worst question you can ask is if I'm investigating you, Brittany, and there's a missing laptop. If I ask you, and a lot of people do this, Brittany, you didn't take the laptop, did you? Right? So I've seen it happen. And that's one of the first things that we talk about are the things that we have to be very careful about. Because once you're going to say no, of course, even if you did take it, right? So now I'm dealing with two challenges. One, that you just show that you're lying, besides being a liar. And before that was that you took something that wasn't yours, right? So we talk about all the details, all the structure, and the importance of quality questions is a part of the course, as well as a two-team method. You have to have a partner in that room with you because in the art of detecting deceptive behavior, people will express verbally and non-verbally behaviors or statements that a lone interviewer, no matter how good you are, your brain's not going to like either, okay, I'm going to listen or I'm going to look. You can try to do it, and I do it that's my last resort, but I always pull in somebody to be my scribe. And we talk about that in the interview. And that scribe doesn't have to be a trained interviewer. In fact, it doesn't matter. As long as you set the ground rules before you go into the interviews with that scribe, that all I want you to do is to document. Here are my questions that I developed because I know quality questions take time to develop. It might take me 20 minutes or 30 minutes to develop my questions. Review the questions with your partner and say, this is the flow. I'm going to do an introduction. I'm going to do certain things when I greet them at the door, when I ask them where they want to sit, give them a little autonomy, a little control for a couple of seconds. The ground rules are, you don't interrupt me. There's no good cop, bad cop. That's silly in the corporate world. And if you have a good scribe, they're going to be able to focus on the verbatim and also behavioral pauses, not summarizing what they think they heard. So
Right.
you want a two-person team in an interview. That's my
Yeah. Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And that's something that we always recommend to our clients as well, even just from an evidentiary perspective, right? Creating a record. that you can rely on in terms of what happened in the course of that discussion.
Mhm.
A lot of the times when it's just one-on-one, you're going to come down to a he said, she said situation, right? When you've got a third party in the room who is taking notes, who is more of an observer, right? They're not participating directly in the interview itself. That can be really, really valuable piece of evidence for you. So I think that's great that that's something that you emphasize as well. And I like that you mentioned that this is not supposed to be a good cop, bad cop situation. How do you combat a situation where when you've got two people on one side of the table and only one person on the other, how do you make them feel a little bit more at ease and not like they're going to get that, attack either from two people at once or that shiftiness of, okay, one of us is going to do one thing and one of us is going to do the other, but it's all designed to manipulate you. How do you kind of address that initial discomfort?
Right. The first few minutes are critical, and you explain who you are. And I mentioned last time that you don't want to start, I'm John with corporate security or Brittany with the law firm. You're Brittany, and then welcome them in. And there's certain things that we want to do with a handshake and a genuine smile and so forth. And then when you sit down, then you can explain what department, what your specific role is, right? But in a non-threatening, non-important way. I'm John Rodriguez. I work with global security. We're part of HR. I'm here to look into, and also the words you pick. You stay away from the word investigation. I'm looking into, or we're here to review something that happened, and we need your help. I'd like you to meet Joe or Sue. They work in such a department, and they're here to help me document everything we talk about because what you say is very important and we want to make sure that we get it right. So you're addressing their status and the importance of them as a person and the fact that you want to document everything, precisely. How you sit, of course, you don't want to sit behind across from the table. You want to be sitting on the same side. You got to be careful with the space. There's intimate, personal, and social space, distancing, and so forth. But you explain that your scribe is going to be on the other side of the desk so they can write their notes or type in the ideally, and even the keyboard, you want to get a soft sounding keyboard because that it can be like a fly buzzing in your ear or a mosquito, right? For both you and the folks that you're interviewing. You want to look at every little detail involved in those minutes that you're together with the person.
Wow, that's great. Thank you for sharing that, John. That's like really, really interesting. And I think honestly very useful outside of an investigation context as well. A lot of the skills that you're talking about are just how to engage and actively listen and make people feel comfortable, which I think is incredibly valuable in all interactions that we have in the workplace, not just in the investigation context. So thank you very much for sharing a little bit about that. Obviously, I'm not going to ask you to go through the entire course with us during this meeting today. Not only would we not have time, but let's move on. And I want to talk a little bit about your mental health advocacy work. And I know you do a lot of work to kind of break through stigma regarding mental health issues, including being very open and sharing your own story and experiences. Now, I want to ask you, how can employers achieve this kind of reduction of stigma regarding mental health issues in the workplace and kind of create what you describe as a psychologically safe and supportive work environment?
Sure. So just a quick overview of my story. Years ago, one of our kids was struggling with depression and self-medicating with marijuana with THC and started using vaping the cartridge of pure THC that triggered a psychotic event. So our life changed completely about 6 years ago. Excuse me. And I found the National Alliance on Mental Illness here in the US. I think it's in Canada. I'm not sure, but there's other similar organizations. So the help that they gave my wife and I to understand our new journey in life to support our kid was fantastic. And one of the things that they do is they have support group discussions where there's two groups, folks that have a diagnosis where they get together and they just share peer level, non-clinician, there's no clinicians in the room, or family members that have other family members that are going through a mental health journey. And it was literally life-saving for my wife and I to start understanding what we had to deal with going forward. So after that first year, I realized that it was so helpful that I wanted to give back to the community. So I got certified with NAMI, and I'm a family support group facilitator, and I've been doing it for the last few years. Every month, at least twice, myself and a partner will lead a support group of folks going through a journey with their family members. And about 3 years ago, I shared my story. And part of mental health is stigma because it's invisible and it's cultural, it's social, it's at work, it's everywhere. And you've heard statistics that before COVID, 1 in 5 folks have or will have a diagnosis in their lifetime. After COVID, it's 1 in 4 or 25%. My number that I throw out is the big unknown number. How many of us, like in my example, have loved ones or people we care about, friends or family members, that we want to understand what they're going through? We want to try to learn how to help them. And it could impact us, our mental wellness at work. So I shared this with one of the VPs. The last company was very big, and she was very empathic and compassionate. She had a nursing background, then she went on to business. She asked me to share my story, and I did, and it grew and it exploded, and now it's part of that company's culture and its support group discussions on mental health. And that's one thing that I work with other clients, with other companies. And the main thing is for leaders to support the initiative and ideally for them to stand up and be the first one to share maybe a journey that they're going through. And it could be a lot of companies have the great benefit of having employee assistance programs as a benefit, including mental wellness, mental health. And I've had clients where I talk to the leaders at a facility and they'll understand the concept and they'll go first in the discussion we're going to have with the workforce. And one example, one leader in California started talking about how he was struggling going through a divorce. And he reached out to a therapist with the AP, and it was incredibly helpful. Then I tell my story. So role modeling and consistency and not having mental wellness or mental health as a program of the year, or, I really don't like mental health day, that there's a global mental health day. I mean, every day is mental health, just like physical health. So busting
Right.
down those stigmas are something that I work with clients on doing. And it's getting better. There's a dollar and cents ROI component that a lot of businesses are starting to realize with absenteeism, presenteeism, accident rates, quality production rates, focus, and so forth, talent retention, talent attraction. I saw an article just recently where the younger generations are looking at companies and how they see or how they care about mental health in that company as a deciding factor if I'm going to work there. So it goes way beyond not just the ROI, but the VOI or the value on investment. That's more qualitative. Quantitative are those lost days recovered or less accidents or employee engagement feedback that you're going to get over time, but also the value of people posting on Glassdoor or Indeed about my company's leadership and involvement and support with mental wellness.
Right. Thank you. Those are all really, really, really good points. And thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you for being brave enough to do that. I think that's very, very valuable. And as you said, it kind of sets the stage for other people to feel comfortable and tell their stories. And it also makes them feel less alone, right? When people know that other people, especially leaders, right, if they're looking up to the leaders in their organization, that they are also having struggles, whether they're own struggles or, as you said, family members, friends that are experiencing their own issues, their own battles. I think that's something that's really remarkable. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I can say certainly what we've noticed in terms of the struggles that our clients are facing, our corporate clients, especially post-pandemic, is the things that you mentioned, the mental health issues. We've seen a huge increase in that being a source of issue in the workplace, including absenteeism, including I really like the word you use of presenteeism, of just of engagement, right? Of employees just being engaged, even if they're there, if they're totally tuned off, like they're just not participating at all, that can be a huge issue as well. And the other thing that comes up a lot is another point that you mentioned is retention. Those two seem to be the two biggest issues that our employer clients seem to be struggling with the most, kind of in a post-pandemic world. So I think that you've identified the value of kind of putting a little bit more of a spotlight or focus on mental health. And like you said, not just one day a year, but
Mhm.
making this part of kind of a culture that an organization has, that it's okay to share what you're going through and that there are supports available when you are experiencing and experiencing these struggles, whether it's yourself or a family member.
Yeah, and that ties into conducting investigations. If you're every corporate investigator, anybody that does investigations, I also stress to dive into learning more about mental health and mental wellness because you could be interviewing a witness that hasn't slept more than 2 hours because her boyfriend or significant other is beating her up at home, right? And she may be or he may be critical with information and they're half asleep. And it's not that they're being deceptive, but they're just going through some things totally that you're unaware of. Maybe some leader at work or their supervisor may know, and that's another part of my course is trying to get information about the person's, in general, just a holistic perspective of the people that you're going to interview, if it's available. But you have to keep all those things in mind from an empathic and compassionate perspective.
Right, absolutely. I think that's a really crucial point. And I think the other thing that ties into this discussion of mental health issues being kind of coming into the focus as one of the main issues that corporations are struggling with, I think it also relates to the fact that during the pandemic, a lot of organizations found themselves suddenly with a lot of remote workers, right, where that was a possibility for them. All of a sudden, we had a lot of people working completely remotely. And since then, what we're seeing is more of a hybrid model, right? We're seeing more and more that people are coming back to the office, but they're not coming back full time. So they're still spending a lot of time at home, which in my experience can make it a lot harder to identify when somebody is struggling, right? I mean, if you're seeing somebody on a daily basis, as a manager, it might be easier for you to identify, oh, John seems a little bit off lately, or he seems to be struggling lately, and that's not like him. I'm gonna reach out and see how things are going. That may not be available to you in a remote work environment or even a hybrid environment where you're just not seeing people as often. So I wanted to briefly get your thoughts on that, and if you've seen the same thing where that's one of the other issues that's coming into play is that we don't have the same maybe detection methods that we had before in a purely in-office environment.
Yeah, great point. And that's on the mark. That goes back to your culture as it relates to safety, not just physical safety at your home office, but mental wellness and having that discussion, that specific discussion about the stressors, the dynamics of working from home before things happen. And that's part of your mental health culture change is to talk about it openly, saying, we're relationship based people or creatures. Our status is important. Stressors from home. Maybe you don't have that commute of the traffic jam stress, but maybe you have some dynamics at home that are causing you stress. So talking about it openly from breaking down the stigma of, hey, take care of each other, care for each other, and notice each other. So a leader of a team may get that extra training to be aware of what you just said, which is perfectly is on the mark. But if you can share that with all employees to say, if you're having a chat with a coworker, and that's where psychological safety comes in, to be open and knowing that you're not going to get in trouble, to, and care for each other, um, to be able to have the method, the support, the encouragement to let somebody know that, hey, I just got off a call with Brittany, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's nothing, but I saw this and I've seen it before. You team leader, you may want to check in with her.
Right. Right, absolutely. And you have to create an environment where people feel safe to share what's going on with them. That it's not going to be a career limiting move, right? I remember that phrase
But yes,
that I still hear every once in a while. That they can be free to actually do that. So I think that's really really valuable. I know we're almost out of time. The time has just flown by. So I know, John, you offer a lot of support options for businesses, not just with the compassionate investigative interview skills, but a lot of other support, training, and mentorship opportunities. So how can people reach you if they want to learn more about what you do or take advantage of some of the programs that you offer?
sure. Again, my company's name is Empathic Security Cultures, not empathetic. Empathic's an older way of saying the same thing. There's my website, John Rodriguez. You can find me there or on LinkedIn. I've posted other things and articles, but my main focus is the culture at work. And it's something that it's a journey. You just can't come in with a program of the year or change, for the month. It's a mindset that leaders have to embrace. Leaders at the C-suite, at a regional, and at a site level, they all impact their culture. And safety and security are one of the primary drivers that people need to feel safe and secure at work before they can be the best that they can be.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, John. It was wonderful having you back on the show. That is a wrap for season 6, episode 10 of Fire Away. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. And again, thanks so much to John for coming back and joining us again and sharing more about the important work that he's doing. Past episodes of Fire Away can be found on YouTube, on our website, and archived on Facebook. And if you like or our page or subscribe to our channel, you will receive notifications when the episodes are live. Our next episode, and surprisingly, the last episode of 2023, we were here already, is going to be airing on December 19th. So make sure you tune in for that. At Rudner Law, we want people to treat their employment relationships as legal relationships and make informed decisions rather than assumptions. I invite you to keep up to date on employment law issues by following us on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok, liking our Facebook page, and subscribing to our YouTube channel, and of course, subscribing to our newsletter. But as we always say, none of that replaces legal advice tailored to your specific circumstances. If you think that you may need an employment lawyer, you probably do. So please feel free to reach out to us. Thanks to Rob, Rebecca, and Mark for helping put the show together as always, and we'll see you next time.